Can an individual who's underweight, has stunted growth, very low body weight, suddenly become obese and overweight in his later life? Is it possible? What do you think, friends? Hi, my name is Pratik. Welcome to My Rebel Nutrition. Today we will be talking about a rather interesting topic: the coexistence of underweight individuals and obese individuals within the same society, as well as whether an individual who is underweight in his early life become overweight and obese in his later life. In order to understand the relationship between being underweight and being obese, we have to first understand what is malnutrition. Malnutrition does not mean undernutrition, which is what it is often mostly misinterpreted as. Malnutrition means an individual who's receiving the wrong nutrition. That means you may be undernourished, consuming less energy, deficient in certain macronutrients, deficient in certain micronutrients, or you may be consuming too much energy, or what is called as overnutrition, where you end up consuming so much energy that you tend to develop diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and cancer. World Health Organization in 2014 published a very good report on the double burden of malnutrition, that is obesity and undernutrition, and found a strong relationship that they exist in the same community. Now, in order to understand why, let us try to understand how the world has changed. Economic factors, especially rapid urbanization, has contributed significantly to this problem. Initially, in first world countries like USA, UK, Australia, which are considered the high income countries, they found that in food deserts, or where people grow up without nutritious food, people often tended to be obese. Now, why is that? It was found that when proper nutrition was not given at an early stage of life, their bodies would go into a energy preservation mode, and subsequently when exposed to high energy foods during their growing up years, or rather adolescent years, the body would not burn the energy as efficiently as it would for a person who was exposed to nutritious food. In addition, let's say if you have not been exposed to fruits and vegetables in your early life, they tended to develop an aversion towards these foods. Hence, initially it was observed that people who were undernourished in the early stage of their lives tended to become obese during their adolescent years. I talked about how our bodies changed. How does our gut bacteria change? If you remember, in my previous video, I talked about the importance of our gut bacteria and various microbial therapies. So make sure you check it out. If our bodies are not exposed, if we are not exposed to nutritious food during the early stages of life, our gut bacteria changes. The diversity of the bacteria and the gene richness varies between a malnourished individual and a well-nourished individual. Now, what happens to our gut bacteria? As our body is in energy preservation mode, our bacteria, which has a symbiotic relationship with the body, tends to respond accordingly. So there will be greater growth in bacteria which will extract a greater amount of energy from our food. Thus, we will tend to accumulate more energy than we can burn, and subsequently the fat storage will go up, and as a result we will set in motion the pathological conditions that will result in obesity. However, it should also be remembered that all these are not just a physiological or a microbial problem. There are social and economic factors as well. What do I mean by economic factors? Often the lack of nutritious food has been blamed on lack of access, which is true, as well as the increasing prices of nutritious foods such as vegetables, fruits, fish, whole grains in lower and middle income countries. However, is nutritious food always expensive? Nobel Prize winning economists Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo in their book Poor Economics mention that at 21 cents in Philippines, you can meet a 2400 kilocalorie requirement. The caveat being, you can only meet it from bananas and eggs. Now, normally, a person is not going to thrive on bananas and eggs. But is it always the economic factors? Because they observed that India, in the areas where there is high iodine deficiency, in the villages, iodized salt was readily available. Yet, people tended not to buy them. Now, is it because there is a gap between education, or rather the right knowledge of nutritious foods and their benefit in our lives? Yes, education is a big problem, especially in the lower and middle income countries, where despite a lot of government programs, it seems like many people have not got the message. So in the book, it's a pretty good book, Poor Economics, and I would recommend everybody to read it. Even if you're not an economist or a person not from an economics background, you will get a lot of deep insight into the connection between nutrition and development. So in this, with respect to this, we should remember that we have a gap in education, we have a gap in availability, as well as when nutritious foods are available, they are not perceived in a good light. Now, why don't poor people or those who have a lower income perceive nutritious food or understand their importance? So for this, we need to understand a little bit about the psychology of lower and middle income individuals, mostly the lower income individuals. It is not always that they are averse to nutrition as such, but rather their priorities are different than others. Their priorities are always to eat the tastiest food, because that gives them a sense of psychological well-being. That gives them a value for money, we can say. So even if they do understand the importance, and even if the food is made accessible for them, as I gave the example in India where iodized salt was readily accessible in the villages, and yet the villagers were not buying it, people tend to prioritize taste. Hence, among the lower and lower middle income sections of the society, people tend to go for calorie dense foods, because that's what tastes good. Because due to the deprivation they have faced in the early life, they want to enjoy the food they are eating. They are less concerned about what the food does to their bodies. While the accessibility of nutritious foods due to prices, rapid urbanization and other factors such as income inequality has decreased, we also need to understand that the access of hyperpalatable foods has increased. Now, from my personal experience, I can tell you, maybe in the 90s or even early 2000s, when I would go to a rural area in India, I would almost never see Oreo biscuits or sugary beverages such as Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Mountain Dew, etc. But now you get them everywhere. They are super accessible and they are also very cheap, sometimes much cheaper than fish, vegetables, fruits, whole grains. Because of the easy accessible of hyperpalatable foods and the psychology that lower middle income group people, or those who are from a not so well off rural background, will have an inherent preference towards tasty foods, they will prioritize eating hyperpalatable foods, ultra processed foods, sugary beverages over nutritious foods. So earlier they were eating fish, vegetables or whatever they got because that is what was available. Now the availability has changed. Now the availability matches the psychology of going for a tastier food. So with the easy access of hyperpalatable foods and as I mentioned earlier, the physiological changes that happen to a body due to malnutrition, they have started consuming calorie dense foods, and they have stopped consuming nutritious foods, and this is a big problem. And because of this problem, you will often see an individual who was extremely underweight in early life, almost with stunted growth, less than 18.5 BMI. Those individuals have become overweight or obese. This problem is more prominent among marginalized groups of the society. Especially in low middle income countries, it has been found that women who are aged between 22 to 49 tend to develop greater rates of obesity and diabetes than men. And it is not a coincidence that women also tend to be more undernourished in their early parts of their life. Without getting too much into the details of why that happens, here our focus was to highlight to you the different physiological factors and socio-economic factors which can lead to an undernourished or an underweight child who's extremely thin in the early part of the life to become overweight or obese. I hope you all got a different perspective to obesity. It is not a very simple issue of somebody being sedentary and eating too much. While those are factors, there are other factors as well. This will give you a new way of looking at a problem where somebody who is thin, undernourished, underweight in early part of their life can develop obesity and associated diseases like type 2 diabetes in later part of the life. I hope you liked the video. Please do subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more such educational videos on nutrition. Thank you.